Welcome to the FarmBits podcast, a product of Nebraska Extension Digital Agriculture. I'm Jackson Stansel.
And I'm Samantha Teaton, and we come to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews and panels with experts, producers, and innovators from all sectors of digital technology, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology. Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to the 42nd episode of the FarmBits podcast.
We are continuing on in our precision crop protection series by welcoming Ethan Noll of AgPartners Co-op.
Ethan is the digital ag team lead at AgPartners, and he is based out of northeastern Kansas.
In his role, Ethan has brought several digital technologies for precision crop protection to the AgPartners offering, including Rantizo and Taranis.
In this episode, we will dive into how Ethan is using those technologies, how he sees them working together for the benefit of farmers, what makes those technologies attractive to work with, and how he envisions the industry evolving in the near future.
It was great to get Ethan's perspective, so let's get right into our interview.
I guess we, usually like to kick things off and see if you want to just tell us a little bit more about yourself, give a little self-introduction and your background and how you got to AgPartners.
Sure. I'm Ethan Noll. I grew up in Northeast Kansas on a farm, raised hogs and cattle, and then went to K-State for 4 years, majored in agronomy with a focus on soil and environmental science. And I got a secondary major in environmental and natural resources. And then I went and worked for the NRCS for 2 years as a soil scientist in Northwest Wyoming, did some initial mapping up there, and then moved back to home to work as a sales agronomist for about 5 years before I took the job I have now. My current job is the head of digital ag for AgPartners Co-op. And so we cover, digital ag covers a lot of different aspects. We cover monitors, we cover precision soil sampling, grid sampling, zone sampling, tissue sampling, planting scripts, fertilizer scripts. And then we do a lot with trials where we try out products for different companies, and that led us to Rantizo and doing a lot of trials through their drones. But then lately we've also gotten into Taranis Scouting, and I've used some drone deploy scouting as well. But we've really liked the Taranis Scouting, gotten really high definition images and really good weed, nutrient deficiency identification, insect identification, stand counts. It's really moving fast. So, but that gives a little bit about my background, I guess. I've been in this role now for about a year. I've been working with the digital ag side for about 4 years total.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a really good introduction to kind of some of the things that we want to talk about in this episode, getting into some of the crop protection technologies. And I guess to kind of start us in that direction, what exactly was it that made y'all decide to pick up these technologies, try to add them to your repertoire there? Was it the growers that were really pushing you to try to add some of these, or is just this kind of a focus of AgPartners to drive some innovation here?
Well, it's been AgPartners' focus to be on the leading edge. Our customers, they've got any number of retailers to choose from, and you're getting more and more pressure from internet businesses like FBN, and so anyone can offer a product, but who's going to bring the service? And so that's why we've always been trying to be on the leading edge on that service provider. And so anymore, since anyone can offer any product, we had to offer it in a different way. And so customers weren't necessarily looking for precision application, but I try to keep my eye on any new technologies coming out. And the Rantizo, they were really kind of getting started in 2018. I noticed that an article about them in, I think, the Farm Journal in 2018. And so I kind of kept my eye on them, thinking, yeah, that's the direction I'd like to go in the future. And when they're ready, when we're ready, we'll jump in.
Sure.
And so we jumped in this spring, and I've already got 6 drones. I can't hardly keep up with the demand. And I've been doing anything from I've been doing a lot of alfalfa and wheat. I've done some odd crops like sainfoin, done a little rye, but a big part of our market so far has been crops that guys don't want to clean out their sprayer for. It's a lot of work to clean out that big ground rig just to go do a 16-acre patch. And so we've been doing a lot of small jobs just for that reason.
Sure.
And I've got another job here for alfalfa seed. And we're going to be applying insecticide on his field to help protect it from insect pressure. But he doesn't want a lot of tracks out there either, so this really works out well for him. And then I really see a future in pairing our Taranis Scouting with the Rantizo drones for certain things like nutrient deficiencies, really tailoring our top dress applications to certain parts of the field and not the whole field. And even that way for insecticide. If all we got to do is the outside, 100 feet of a field, that saves the customer on insecticide product and potentially reduces the amount of beneficials that we kill or injure, and maybe even helps the bees, honeybee populations out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think those are a lot of different, advantages of using a UAV to do this sort of spraying. And I guess you've kind of spoken to this already, but when we're thinking about efficiency of these different applications, right? We're looking at aerial applicators, ground rigs, and UAVs. What is your perception of how all these kind of work together within this space to build a comprehensive solution?
I don't think drones, at least the way drones are right now, are going to replace planes and ground rigs. I just can't get enough acres done in a day to completely move from one to the other. The planes are still going to be doing, those big quarter sections, half sections, because they can just do it so much more efficiently and at a cheaper cost. But when you involve fields that are little patches or areas that have a lot of trees around them, or even power lines, how good of a job can a plane really do? And especially if it's a little patch, they're sitting there just circling the field the whole time, and really hard to get to the edge of that field. And so I think there's a lot of demand in Northeast Kansas because we still have some fairly steep hills, some trees, and it's just really hard for a plane to do a good job of it. And as far as a ground rig goes, the ground rig's still going to be doing a lot of these acres, especially corn and soybeans, the primary crops. And the drones just make those ground rigs more efficient. If they don't have to flush out to go do a small job of alfalfa or whatever, it makes them that much more efficient. They can get more acres done in a day. And so they can give me the small jobs and I'll go do those with the drones and probably even do a little better job. We're not going to replace them, but one of the other perks of drones is if that ground is too wet for that ground rig to get out there, I can still go out there and spray, which is why part of the reason I'm kind of tired is because there's not too many days I can't apply. Right. And so really the only thing that keeps me from applying is rain, like if it's raining the whole day, or if it's too windy. True. And my wind limitations are about the same as a ground rig. 15 miles an hour is about the same. And so the drone handles it pretty well. It's a pretty good sized drone, and wind doesn't make it shift too much, especially if you fly against the wind and with the wind, you don't see as much tilt in the drone. So sure. But to answer your question, I think they will all work well together, and you won't see one replace the other. But you'll see some of those bigger machines get more efficient.
Sure. So can you put some numbers to that? What kind of is the acreage per hour, or kind of that productivity rate that you're looking at with like a Rantizo drone versus some of these other application equipment?
Well, we just did swarm training last week, but I haven't done any swarming on a field just yet. Sure. But for a single drone, you're looking at about 14 acres per flight hour. And so it just depends on how efficient I get filling the drone. changing batteries and getting all the chemical mixed and ready. But you're looking at a big day for one drone would be probably 80 to 100 some acres in a day. But like once we get swarming, we should be able to do, if we're really good at it, 40 acres an hour. Because you're flying 3 drones at once and you're keeping them going.
Yeah, you mentioned how a lot of the technology is kind of driven from the service side of things. Are there any situations where the growers are asking for more technology, or are they excited about anything in particular?
I don't have customers coming up and asking me for this stuff just yet. Although I found that when I do customer meetings, some of the customers will be like, yeah, I was looking at that Rantizo stuff, or yeah, I was looking at that Taranis stuff. That is awesome that you guys have this, because I didn't think it'd be out yet. And so some of them just don't realize what all is out there, and we just got to do a better job of marketing it to the customer. And so we've been doing some Facebook videos and Twitter. That's where Twitter videos and messages.
Darn Twitter machine.
Yeah, but we've been posting stuff, and so we've been like trying to advertise for like spraying bagworms in trees. And so I've gotten a couple of calls about spraying bagworms. I've had a lady down south calling us about cantaloupe, spraying her cantaloupe with the drones. There's like an acre's worth of cantaloupe. And so we do occasionally get people calling and asking for it. But it's those unusual ones that we're usually getting calls from, because we've advertised the Rantizo stuff and they're calling about it. I've had several duck hunters wanting me to go do some stuff too. One wants me to spray the lily pads in his pond. Another one wanted me to spread some seed on some areas that were flooded, because he couldn't go out there and plant them himself. So there's going to be a lot of unique customers that we just aren't used to working with, I think. And I'm even trying to look and spread this business into like the vineyard territory, because I mean there's some vineyards around Manhattan, there's probably some vineyards around Missouri.
We got some in southeast Nebraska too.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a demand for that, because it's just so easy to fly over those vines rather than just spray it by hand. And cut their time in at least half, if not more.
Sure. And that's really interesting. I think that you're bringing up all these different small plots, the specialty crops and all that. Because I guess, usually in agriculture, we're thinking about economies of scale, right? Like how many acres can we cover? And so, is that ROI really there for some of these smaller jobs? Because in my mind, it's like you get started with the job and it seems like it'd be so expensive, but is there really an ROI there?
Well, if you think about it, one, if you're spraying like that field of cantaloupe, it's an acre. If one person tried to spray that, it would take him quite a while to spray a whole acre with a hand wand.
Sure.
Because you couldn't do it with like a Ranger with a sprayer on the back, a UTV sprayer, because you'd be running over the cantaloupe.
Yeah.
And so you'd have to walk carefully through it to get them all sprayed. And so it would take quite a while. And so we'd be saving that amount of time, and you don't have the person out there out in the middle of spraying the insecticide, exposed to the insecticide. And so we have a fair amount of distance between us and the drone, and we can be a little safer with it. And then some of the other little jobs is like spraying shatter cane along tile lines. Guys just can't, they don't want to run over the whole crop just to spray that shatter cane. But we can target it with the drone and go hit those tile lines. They know where the tile risers are, and we can target those areas. And so, to the customer, it makes a lot of sense to save them from, messing with their sprayer, running over the crop, and when we can do it in a fraction of the time, for not as much, not very much cost.
Sure. So we've kind of talked about a bunch of different application use cases. I think we've already brought up insecticides, fungicides. We talked about weeds now. And you talked about the potential for site-specific nutrient management. I mean, which of these do you see currently being the biggest ROI, and what do you think is kind of the biggest potential ROI out of these different application scenarios? I know it's kind of putting you on the spot there, but.
Well, I was talking to some of the Rantizo guys about this last week, and the fungicide pays the bills because that is going to be 80% of our acres.
Sure.
But it's those odd jobs that you really make the money on, because we charge a little more per hour because of the uniqueness of them. And so, and in those little jobs, because we have a minimum that we charge, like we actually make a little more per hour. And so those are the jobs that actually make us the money. It's those jobs in that off time, because we know we're going to have that fungicide run. It's those other jobs that's really going to kind of bring in the money because we just weren't really expecting them.
Sure.
And so, but yeah, the fungicide is going to make up about 80% of that, I think.
Yeah. And on the farmer customer side, I mean, where do they see maybe not the most ROI, but the most value in kind of bringing this in? Do you think where do they see the most potential value?
When I talk to the customer, I think the two things that they are the most excited about is that shatter cane run. Like I'm probably going to do a run here next week, cleaning up some of these soybeans and tile lines, because they really hate going out there and driving in circles trying to hit all these shatter cane patches.
Yeah.
I think that one has maybe one of the most return on investment, because it saves them a lot of time and stress. But I suppose the insecticide, because we can get out there pretty timely with our insecticide run. And with insects, it's like that pressure can pop up pretty quick, especially on alfalfa and weevil. And just for the fact that we can get out there quicker than a ground rig, because you usually have to wait for them to finish up their job on corn and beans to switch over. And then I'm going to say insects on soybeans too, or corn, where I'm just maybe spraying some edges and cleaning up those edges on, Japanese beetle or grasshoppers, bean leaf beetles. If I can clean those edges up without doing the whole field, they're going to save quite a bit of money on insecticide.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess since you kind of brought up the insecticide again, I heard earlier you said that you're kind of using Taranis as a scouting tool, right? And kind of seeing some good efficacy out of their insect scouting. Maybe would you mind telling us a little bit more about how you're using Taranis to almost inform some of your applications with the drone, or even some of your own scouting?
Yeah, so Taranis, for those that aren't familiar with it's essentially grid sampling for scouting, and they're taking a picture every 2.5 acres. And they can identify the weeds, nutrient deficiencies, insect pressure, I guess, defoliation, but also identify the insects, and then the stand counts. But it, just like grid sampling gives you a better idea of what's out there for nutrients, this is going to give you a much better idea of what's out there for the field. How many agronomists really truly do a great job of scouting for insects and defoliation when that corn is 10 foot tall? Guys hate walking through that corn, getting whacked in the face with leaves, walking out covered in orange rust. And I mean, it's not much fun. And, allergies are bad from all the pollen. Yeah. And so, and what are you actually seeing? And so you're not necessarily seeing all the defoliation, all the nutrient deficiencies. And on soybeans, guys will spot check around the field, but are they getting into the middle of the field? Not necessarily. You really got to do quite a bit of walking and usually muddy to get out to that middle of the field. And so this is giving you a lot better idea of what's out there. But it's also giving you history of the field. And so if a guy at the end of the year says, man, my corn was terrible, like what happened? We can go back and then look and be like, well, we're not seeing the nutrient deficiencies. We're not seeing issues with your stand count. We're not seeing issues with this. If we're not seeing the issues, then we can kind of we can figure out what caused it. Maybe it was a hybrid, maybe it was the early planting date, that cold snap or whatever. but it helps having that history to back up the analysis at the end of the year. And then it's ultra specific. And so like what we see on the insect pressure is it'll go down to the 10th decimal as far as defoliation. And so it'll tell you if it's, close to that economic threshold, or maybe telling you where a hot spot is. And then they even have a thing on their dashboard that shows the top 10 worst fields. And so it'll say, here's your top 10 weediest fields, here's your top 10 defoliated fields from insect pressure. And so it helps the customer prioritize which fields he needs to start on, or maybe even just get to, and the ones he doesn't have to worry about so much. So we're seeing a lot of benefit from that Taranis Scouting.
Sure.
So does having all that added information and then also the capabilities as far as applying with the drone technology, does that give you more flexibility as far as what recommendations you can make? Does that kind of change anything on your side?
It just makes us more precise. I don't know about flexibility because, the more information that the more you dial that in, right? And so we're really dialing in what goes where. And I suppose as far as flexibility, it's not necessarily flexibility. It's just saying, all right, these fields are the issues, because most times you're not going to have any major issue on a field. That's just kind of how scouting goes. But you're always going to have that one field that has the issues that pays for the rest of the fields that you didn't find issues on. That's usually how scouting works. And so I don't know that it makes it any more flexible. It just makes it so that you are more precise with your decision making.
Sure.
Yeah.
So with Taranis kind of being used as a scouting tool right now, is there any option within the platform or any opportunity you see long term to use it more as a decision tool, like for them to create prescription maps for, say, site specific spraying for, whether it's insects, fungicide, weeds, anything like that?
I currently have them and Rantizo kind of talking with each other, where Taranis can create a map and send it to the Rantizo drone. I also have kind of a middleman in EFC Field Analytics.
Okay.
They're our precision ag program. That's where we do our dispatch. And I really like their program for Rantizo because the way the DJI drones that we use for Rantizo, the way they work is you have to import a shapefile or fly the boundary. Flying boundaries is really difficult to get a very precise boundary. And so I prefer importing the shapefile. And so EFC is really good at that because I can make seasonal zones, split a field up any different ways, and then I can export those zones as a shapefile. And so I also have Taranis sending all their imagery in the future here to EFC Field Analytics. And so I can import that heat map of the weeds, and then I can create my seasonal zones for the Rantizo drone. And so it really makes a pretty strong trifecta. I mean, you've got those three working together. And then at the end of the year with EFC Field Analytics, I can do all my analysis. I can do my profit mapping at the end of the year to see what paid, especially if I'm doing trials. If I'm doing a fungicide trial, and I can see that where I applied that fungicide, I had 10 more bushel to the acre and it cost me this much, I can pretty easily tell that return on investment across that field.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those three working together, Taranis is even talking to Climate where they import those heat maps, but EFC is the main place that I'm creating those work orders and those scripts for the different zones that we're going to be applying.
So I think that's awesome, and I'm just very intrigued as to your opinion on, we hear a lot about automation in agriculture, right, and trying to create prescriptions. Where do you see automation ever playing a role in that, or as an agronomist, do you like having that final say about, okay, I see your heat map and I understand that, but I also have my own context about this field and my experience? Do you like being able to sit there and manually create those zones, or do you think the efficiency that would come with automation is of value in that scenario?
I know Rantizo, they're kind watching some of this data to really get to the fine points of how things need to be done. And so if we recognize like there's a hot spot of insect pressure, we probably want to expand it a little outside of that area. You don't want to just go to the edge of that because they're spreading as you're, creating all this stuff up. And you probably want to be on the safe side of getting a little past that edge, just to make sure you really get all the insects that are there. And so I think right now it's going to be more conducive for me to create those scripts, at least on the insect side. On the nutrient side, I think there could be some automation on the nutrient side that would be more efficient. But I've always kind of had this me versus the machine mentality, kind of like John Henry, where I feel like I can always beat the machine. So yeah. Until that day comes where I see the machine can beat me, I guess I like having that under my control and being able to do that myself. At least take whatever script is automatically generated and then being able to fine tune it and adjust it myself.
Absolutely. The edit button is a critical piece of
the process. Yeah, very critical. Yeah.
Got you. So kind of along those same lines, and I'm sure Zach will jump in here in a little bit with some more agronomic questions, but coming at this from the engineering side, because that's where I am. What is it that makes you look at a product and say, I really like using this, or, this is a super easy interface for me to interact with, or I really want to try that? Like, what makes a platform attractive to you versus what are some of the major turnoffs almost immediately for a platform?
The things that I really like are a simple user face. It's no different than Apple. Apple became so big because it was easy to use. Mm-hmm. And so a major turnoff for me is just it's not very simple. And so any number of technologies a farmer uses, a yield monitor, for example, he uses that 2, maybe 3 months out of the year, and then he sets it down and doesn't use it again. And so when he starts using it again 8 months later, they're like, how do I use this? What button do I push? And so the simpler it is, the fewer questions the customer has for me or I have for the company. And so that's a big deal. And then the other big deal is they're willing to work with other companies. And that's something I think Taranis and EFC and Rantizo have been really good about, is they're willing to reach across the aisle and work with these other companies, because no one company can do it all. It won't happen. A drone company doesn't necessarily want to get into that data analytics side. That's something for EFC Field Analytics. And Field Analytics doesn't necessarily want to get into the drone scouting side. It's just too many pieces. But if they're willing to work together, they're much stronger as a whole than they are as an individual company. Another big deal, anytime you're working with new technology, there's going to be issues. It's going to happen. And so having a really good tech support is a really big deal. And so I've dealt with companies where you call them and they kind of just want to blame it on you, kind of thing, and they don't answer right away. And so those aren't companies I want to work with. I want to work with companies that have really good tech support, that can walk you through the issues and be pretty sensitive to the fact that we're all learning this technology, and we're usually called pretty frustrated and mad that something happened. So,
and it's a timely business. It's an important business. People have money on the line. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think those are all super important points. Zach, do you have anything that you wanted to get to, or you want me to just kind of keep digging on?
Yeah, I got some questions more along the scouting side of things, I guess. So the drone scouting, as far as like the insect defoliation, and maybe I'm guessing you probably have some NDVI sensors as well. How do you use those or put them into practice for scouting? And do you still need to do any ground truthing with that? And where do you see the most value in incorporating that into crop consulting?
So we have NDVI imagery from it goes through Taranis, but it's Planet Labs satellite imagery, and it's pretty high resolution. But as I said earlier, the points that we take from the Taranis Scouting show you like a grid, and it doesn't really interpolate everything that's really truly out there. And so if you can look at the satellite imagery, that NDVI imagery from Planet Labs, and kind of compare that to the point scouting that you're seeing, sometimes you can correlate those. If I'm seeing a potassium nutrient deficiency and it shows up everywhere that it's red on that NDVI map, that means that's the most limiting factor there, and I need to apply some form of potassium in that part of the field. But also, nutrient deficiencies don't always show up on the leaf. You know, it might be nitrogen deficient, but it's not showing up on the leaf. And so you may not see a nutrient deficiency until it's too late if you're looking at it that way. But I can look at that NDVI imagery, maybe go out and take a tissue sample in those areas and see that hidden hunger that's there as far as a nutrient deficiency. And so those two things really work well together as far as that goes. But as far as boots on the ground, it's still very critical to have those boots on the ground because, for example, on stand counts, if I'm looking at a bean field and I got a good stand count from Taranis, it's going to identify the plants that are up. But if maybe there's really thick residue over the top of those beans, it's not going to see those. And a drone can't just kick the residue off the ground to see if there's anything coming up. And so it's still pretty critical that the agronomist goes out there and checks it out. And so what we found is that the agronomists are more efficient with their time when they go out to the fields. They don't have to spend all their time looking over the whole field, worried about what they're going to miss. Rather, they look at the scouting from Taranis first, then go out there and possibly even go out there with the customer, you know, in a UTV together and look at what they're seeing and be like, yes, this is an issue. You need to replant here, or no, there's still some coming up. It's not a big deal. We'll keep an eye on it, but it looks like we'll be okay. And so they just, it tells them where to go to help them be more efficient with their time. And maybe they don't even need to look at every field. They just need to look at the ones that they think are a problem.
I thought that was a great answer. Covered everything.
Yeah, that's
really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty thorough. I think that's along the lines of what I've been in other conversations with consultants out there. I feel like a lot of them are kind of in that same boat. They feel like the imagery is super helpful, but they never want to turn it just strictly to a sensor or to an image. So
yeah, and the thing about our agronomists is a key part of their job is that relationship building with the customer. And if they're spending all of their time out in the field looking at crops, it takes them away from being in front of the customer. And so you can kind of relate it back to the health field. The doctor doesn't take your blood pressure. The doctor doesn't test your reflexes necessarily. They don't take your height and weight. The nurse does that. Mm-hmm. And so that's where these drone pilots come in. They're kind of taking the place of the nurse, doing a lot of that groundwork.
Diagnostics.
The agronomist, the agronomist comes in later, looks at the information, makes the decisions, and then kind of goes over that prescription with the farmer of what needs to happen next.
Sure.
And so I think that's been the biggest thing. That's really kind of what got me started with the Taranis Scouting, was trying to find a solution to free our agronomists up to keep them from being out in the field all day, every day.
Sure. And what do you feel like the role is of a consultant or agronomist out there in terms of translating these precision ag technologies? Because we have a lot of them out there, but the adoption, as we all know, is pretty low. I mean, what really is that role of that agronomist right now in trying to translate precision ag to the farm?
I think it's critical to have precision ag guys just like me, digital ag guys, whose only job it is to figure out these technologies. I've been in that sales agronomist role, and when you're trying to learn all these new technologies on top of scouting, on top of making the prescriptions to the farmer, it's a lot of work, and your mind's getting pulled 100 different ways. And so it's kind of a team effort, and I think that's something we really do well at AgPartners is our team effort. But we have me bringing the technology to them, and then they don't have to figure it all out. I help them, get the simple stuff that they need, and then they take the information to the farmer. I provide the information, and then they're the mediator that really takes it to them to go that next level. And so I think the sales agronomist role is really just scan through your scouting images and define what things can be done with, like the Rantizo drones. They're in the job of finding solutions. And I'm just the means of the solution, I guess, with the technology.
Sure. Yeah, it seemed Zach and I were kind of talking a little bit before we got on here, just thinking about kind of consultants. We haven't had a ton of like consultant or agronomist or digital, specialist people come on the show. And it seems like, with the adoption of these precision ag technologies being so low for farmers, it's almost like there needs to be somebody that is being that bridge between the technology and the farm, and showing them, how it can be used effectively.
Yeah, farmers only have so much time in the day. I help my dad farm on the side, and their focus is that business side of things. They're trying to make sure they're making money. They're trying to make sure they keep their animals alive. They're trying to make sure they get the planting done, the harvest done, and in a timely manner, get the spraying done. They only have so much time to go out and look into these other technologies. And then just to figure them out, I mean, it's a lot of time and stress to try to figure them out, especially when they're brand new. And so having that third party, that trusted retailer or advisor that you work with, having them do some of that legwork, that's a big deal to them. And so they don't have to learn all these new technologies. They just have to have someone that's really good at doing it. And I'll say, like, anytime I've shown them some of the Taranis Scouting or the Rantizo application, most guys are like, yeah, hell, we've seen drones before. What's different? And then as soon as they see that big Rantizo drone applying pesticide across the field, they're all amazed.
Yeah.
And they're all taking pictures, sending the pictures to their kids, sending the pictures to their friends, and be like, hey, look at this. Look what we've got going on here.
Yeah.
The future of farming. And so I can honestly say that I haven't had a single customer that we haven't impressed with these technologies.
That's really cool. So thinking, back into kind of the crop protection space and how it's being executed right now, we have all these new technologies. We have the Taranis, we have the Rantizo and all this. What do you think are still some of the existing gaps that you could fill with technology? Or like, if you had one technology to add to the mix, what do you think that might be?
I'm placing my bets on autonomous weed control or even fertilization. If we get these small machines that can go out and do some of this, even if it's mechanical weeding, I think it makes everyone's job a little easier. And I kind of think that's the next step. And then you can even be more precise with that. If you have mechanical weed control, you don't have the issues with weed resistance. And you don't necessarily have this gap between the consumer and the producer as far as pesticides and what you use. And so I think that's going to be the next big area. And it's kind of similar to what we're doing with a drone. It may not necessarily replace that ground rig. I think you're still going to need a good residual out there. Otherwise, you're going to have a mess. But if you can get some weed control with smaller machines, I think that's going to be a big deal. And even, nutrient application, if you could, go in between the rows and spread nutrients, or even a cover crop seed underneath the rows, I think that could be the next big deal. Yeah, I know there's a lot of groups out there. I know I've seen universities working on these. I've seen certain companies trying to bring stuff to the table, and I think they're probably still 5 years out, but I think when that comes, I think that's going to be a game changer.
Sure. Yeah, I guess in my experience over the past few years doing on-farm research, it seems like June is almost always farmers' busiest months out here, trying to handle spraying, side dress applications, and when it's dry, trying to run pivots here in Nebraska. And between those three, I mean, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. So if you have autonomy in weed management, I mean, that almost takes an entire job
Yeah.
out of there, you know?
Yeah.
So as far as like biggest issues that your customers face, what new technologies do you think could address? What are the top maybe like 2 or 3 issues that they face every year? And do you see some of these new technologies kind of fitting into a solution there?
Timeliness of application, I think, is probably one of the biggest problems. You know, a guy can only do so much in a day, and because of weather, wind, or rain, that limits them. And where I'm only limited by wind for the most part with the drones, I think we can address some of that. I can't make it rain when we're really dry.
Sure.
But that's probably the next big thing is
Sure.
for the customer. But I know that I've seen we're starting to see a few more pivots in Northeast Kansas and Southeast Nebraska. But those might be a little slower to come to the table. We've got some, like NutriDrip in our geography. I've seen some of these precision irrigation systems that are coming out, and maybe there's a future there.
Mhm.
But where we are, any water has to come from basically a pond that they build just for the purpose of irrigating.
Sure. That makes sense. I think, those are tough problems to solve. And I think the water problem, obviously, nobody can solve super well. And it's tough too with us, pulling from the Ogallala and all the different restrictions that are placed on that as far as recharge goes. So,
yeah. And the thing with irrigation management is I've heard a lot of customers just saying, I've got this pivot. I just don't know if I'm making money on it. I feel like I'm spending all my money on fuel, on fixing up the pivot. And it's like, I just don't feel like I'm really making money. And so I think hopefully using these scouting tools and the Rantizo drones helps them be more profitable on those pivots where we can really target those areas under the pivot and,
sure.
and bring a little more management to them.
Sure.
And then, like something else I've seen, because we're in terrace country.
Yep.
Terraces are really hard to do any side dress work on.
Sure.
And that's where I think that nutrient application with the drones is really going to help address that problem, because guys don't like running over their corn.
Yep.
And it is with a terrace, you're going to run over some corn. It's just going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hoping that these drones really fill that gap and bring a little more to the table there, and maybe even open up some business that wasn't there before, because guys just didn't want to run over their corn or
sure,
try to run over the whole field just to get to certain spots.
Sure. And along the lines of that response, I mean, one thing we like to do in every interview is ask what a piece of advice you have about some particular topic. And I guess the piece of advice I would ask for is for somebody who's looking to kind of get into this digital ag consultant role, or for a farmer, that these people who are kind of exploring these new technologies and getting ready to take a step into this next generation. What would be your advice for the mindset they need to have as they approach these technologies that are coming onto the market?
I think to be patient. I think that's my piece of advice.
That's fair.
Because with these new technologies, they're not always going to work 100% of the time. And so just having patience and not giving up when it doesn't work that first time that they do it, or even the second time, keep at it and keep looking at it, because I think they're going to find that some of these technologies have a specific use. And so like on drones have been out now, 5-10 years, and there's a lot of excitement around them that it was going to change the way things are done. And then a couple of years later, guys all they were doing was taking pictures of corn, of their fields or of their equipment, and maybe looking at some down corn. But it wasn't until a few years later that, we really got it fine tuned. And so I've been with Taranis for several years. In that first year, they had some cool things, but we had to work on some things. And so if you're patient with that company and you trust that company's direction that they're going, be patient with them. They'll be patient with you. And I think you'll have a better relationship moving forward. And that's the same for farmers. If they find a company that they like working with, a retailer that they like working with, be patient with them and don't just jump the fence because let's just say you're working with like a climate field view or even our competitor, if you're working with granular, if you're working with them and they decide, if you get mad at one thing that happened and try to switch to another company, you just lose pretty much all that data. And so if you're patient with them and stay with them, I think it'll pay off. If you trust the direction that they're going, do the research on where they're going first, and then make your decision to jump in. But then once you jump in, be patient with them.
Yeah, allow it to play out. Don't let one bad thing on one bad field in 1 year be the sole determining factor.
Yep.
That makes sense for sure. One other thing that I just wanted to ask, because this is something I think about a lot, and you may have seen some stuff out there, is have you seen any like new or innovative ways for people to compare new practices versus what growers have been doing on their operation, in the first place? So one thing that we've run into, it's really hard, especially in fertigation, because we don't have a lot of resolution right now, is like we have these 9-acre plots, more or less. Like they're somewhere between 5 and 9 acres. And the 5 or 9 acres that's, 15 degrees the other way, well, you're already on top of a hill, or you're, in a bottom now, and it's much more productive ground. And you're trying to make comparisons between two different managements. Like even if it's in a replicated study, it's like, how do you truthfully say this is the baseline productivity or the baseline profitability of this ground, and this is how this new management would compare?
So this makes me think, we did some trials with a dual hybrid planter. And that was really tough to really gauge how much it benefited from it. And so like what we were doing in that case was we tried to put blocks right next to each other in a portion of the field. So it's like I have 2 blocks next to each other in the bottom, 2 blocks next to each other on the hill, and 2 blocks like on top of the hill. But you treat each part of the field like you would normally with that variety or whatever you're doing. So you can't treat it all the same. If like that bottom, I'm going to push my population more. So you got to push your population more on the trial for both varieties. And so I think you really, you got to have a tool to do the yield analysis, and you got to have some areas of the field that you can compare. And if you can do, like if you're doing a fertigation kind of strip, it's like you can do one strip across the field with the fertilizer that you're going to use. Although I guess if you're going through a pivot, it's different. But if I'm going, I would do it with a drone. I do one strip with the fertilizer, one strip without, and have it go across the whole field. And then you try to, when you're doing the analysis, you got
pairwise pretty much.
Yeah, you're going to just circle areas that are the same. You can't look at the whole block versus the other whole block, because your ratio of soil types may not be the same. So you really just have to that's what I do anyways. I circle the areas that I know are going to be pretty even on yield. I look at past year's yield data and be like, yeah, that area looks pretty even. Let's see what it did there. And then the other thing is straight lines don't happen in nature. And so anytime I can see a straight line out there, it means we had something happen. And so if you can adjust that yield map in a way to give you to show up in any sort of fashion that shows that straight line, it means you had something happen. And then you got to be willing to accept when things don't happen and not be fishing for data.
It's a fine line there.
Because I know some of these companies, when I send them their data, I'm like, I didn't see anything.
They're
like, oh, give it to us, we'll find it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you will.
5 or 6 bushels, I'm sure. Somewhere in there. That's true. It's those seem to be the kind of things that we're trying to I feel like there's going to be a breakthrough at some point. Somebody will come up with some new technology to try to really reduce the area that you're covering with some of these plots, and some other statistical method to try to really tease out differences. But I think it's really a challenge. I don't know, to compare across years, and I mean that's why you have to have replicated multi-year studies. But
Yeah. Any study that we do on a product, we usually do over 2 to 3 years, because one year might be dry, one year might be wet. And just because the product didn't work when it was really wet doesn't mean it won't work when it's really dry, especially if it's a stress mitigator.
exactly.
And so, like I said, you got to be patient with the new technology. You got to be patient with the products and the process, and don't just give up because it didn't work for one time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much to Ethan Noll of AgPartners Cooperative for taking the time to join us here on the FarmBits podcast. I tell you, I really enjoyed having a consultant on. It was kind of fun to hear his perspective on some new technology that's coming out, particularly in the crop protection space. I think one of my favorite things in the episode was hearing him talk about what exactly makes an interface really fun to work with, and also what he thinks people really, how people really need to approach a new technology such as these for crop protection, and really understanding how to use them, and also just being patient, understanding that there will be some trials and tribulations early on in the process of learning a new technology.
Yeah, and he was using new technologies for a wide range of applications in crop protection and agronomy. I liked how he discussed insect pest management, fungicide applications, crop nutrient deficiencies, quite a wide range of issues he was tackling with this new technology.
Absolutely. And, it sounds like they're really doing a lot to help growers in that area. So I look forward to seeing what he's able to advance with next, and how the adoption of these technologies goes in northeastern Kansas, and wherever else he's helping out in southeastern Nebraska or Missouri or wherever else. So thank you again to Ethan. Really enjoyed that episode, and we look forward to bringing you another episode focused on precision crop protection next week. Thanks.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback. So if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the review section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We'd like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to the members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect reviews of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.